Right.
Hospitals, governments, and companies.
Yeah, and some of that too is to say, hey, we know who you are.
Exactly.
We know what you're up to. It's a little bit of like, exactly. Alex Marquardt, thanks very much. Now, a stunning investigation that highlights how military-grade spyware was used to target people around the world, including notably activists, dissidents, journalists, political leaders as well. The Washington Post, with the help from a consortium of media organizations, uncovered dozens of phones infected with this spyware. CNN has not been able to independently verify the Washington Post story. We should know. Joining me now, one of the journalists behind what's known as the Project Pegasus investigation, Washington Post national technology correspondent Craig Tinberg. Craig, good to have you on this morning. I mean, this is notable, one, because of the scope of it, but two, also the kinds of people involved. I mean, this was a deliberate attempt to follow, to track, to surveil journalists, dissidents, political leaders. How far did it go?
We'll probably never know how far it went. What we do know is that, as you said, this technology, which is designed to track terrorists and criminals such as pedophiles and drug lords, in fact has been used against human rights workers and business executives and journalists in many parts of the world.
Would these people have known it, and can they have confidence now, right, once identified, that they can get rid of this kind of software?
No and no.
Wow.
It gets delivered in different ways, but in some cases you don't even know that you've gotten a malicious link, and they can just take over your device. And you can certainly get a new device, but in one case we interviewed a woman in France whose iPhone 11 was infected, and so we found that infection, and then she borrowed another iPhone, a 6S, and then that was infected. Literally the same week we interviewed her, her second device was also infected. So if these governments really want to track you, this spyware really makes it pretty easy, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you wonder because, of course, your profile uploaded to the cloud, you get a new phone, it's downloaded, does the stuff still live in there? Tell us about this company behind this software that licenses. It's based in Israel, significantly. The NSO group, they say it's intended only for use in surveilling terrorists and major criminals, as you mentioned, folks accused of sex crimes. Of course, that's not who's using this now entirely. Is that company responsible?
It's a good question. I mean, one useful metaphor is Smith & Wesson responsible for the way its guns are used once it sells them? And the company says, we don't really know exactly in real time what happens once it's in the hands of a government client. Now, they do investigations. They do go back and get phone numbers sometimes, but they tell us that they have no real-time visibility. So is it their fault when abuses happen? It's really up to our readers and your viewers to decide.
Well, but wait a second here. I mean, if I sell a gun to a hunter, that's one thing. If I sell it to the head of a drug gang, I mean, that's another thing. And the trouble is the countries involved here are known, authoritarian regimes. I mean, did the Israeli companies sell it to these governments knowing their past behavior in terms of handling dissidents, journalists, opposition leaders?
Your metaphor is a good one to a point, but what if the hunter also runs a drug ring? So
Jesus. I mean, that's a nice excuse, but I'm sorry. If you're selling this kind of spyware to an authoritarian regime, you got to bear some responsibility for how it's used.
I'm not disagreeing with you on that one, but what I am saying is that they claim to vet their client governments thoroughly. They tell us that they've cut off clients, in some cases giving up lots of revenue. And they also say that there's lots of countries they'll never sell to. This is regulated, but yes, I share your concern that once it's in the hands of governments that have human rights records that we know about, I think it's reasonable to ask, should NSO have been doing business with these companies and should they still be doing business with these countries?
No question. Well, listen, it's great reporting here, a great team that uncovered really an alarming scope of this kind of surveillance. Craig Tinberg, thanks to you and your team.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
In minutes, a Capitol rioter